Welcome to another episode of the Work Hard, Play Hard podcast. My name is Rob Murgatroyd, and each week on this podcast, I talk to some of the most fascinating people on the planet in all areas of life, from mindset to fitness to spirituality and, of course, business. Look, I believe you deserve success in all the areas of your life, not only business. But before we get into today's show, you may want to join us on our next Work Hard, Play Hard experience. This year, we're going to be going to Mykonos and Marrakesh. In these experiences, I have hand-selected a group of high-performing business people who are seeking more balance, connection, and they want to celebrate their wins as a reward for the hard work that they put in. If you want someone to curate once-in-a-lifetime experiences and force you to play more, rush over to workhardplayhardexperience.com. Fill out an application so we can jump on a discovery call to see if this is a good fit for you. And remember, excuses are over. It's time to live.
So 180 feet per second, 0.2 of a second equates to 56 feet. 56 feet is the difference between first and sixth at the Daytona 500. The difference in money is $1.1 million. So $1.1 million is riding on 0.2 of a second. You know, companies want their team to operate like a pit crew. And what they think that is, implementing a process or a system. And it's not. Operating like a pit crew is elevating people over process. Like I said, inspiring human brilliance. Let's find the things that are different about each other, and instead of underscoring them and letting them divide us, let's be curious about them and bring us together.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Work Hard, Play Hard show. And today on the show is Shaun Peet. Shaun played hockey for Dartmouth College and then went on to play 8 years of pro hockey and then decided to completely try something new and went on to become a Jackman in a top-level NASCAR pit crew. I mean, it sounds crazy, but when you hear his story, you'll see how it effortlessly flowed from one part of his life into the next part of his life. He's also the co-founder of Deck Leadership and co-authored a book called 12-Second Culture. So the reason why I wanted to have him on the show is to show you how we don't have to do one thing for our whole life, and how you can use the lessons that he learned from hockey and NASCAR to accelerate, pun intended, your own life. You're going to love this interview, so please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Shaun Peet. Shaun, welcome to the show.
Man, I'm thrilled to be here, Rob. Thank you.
You know what? Nobody is more happy than me because I get to talk about two things I know zero about, which is hockey and NASCAR. So we're going to talk about both of those things. And your story is so interesting to me. And I'd like to start by rewinding the clock back a bit and heading back to Vancouver Island. How would you describe what growing up there was like? And maybe you could contrast that to how different it may be from the United States.
Growing up on the west coast of Vancouver Island, I grew up in a logging town, a very blue collar people, and very tight knit families. Came from two really wonderful parents, and it was a great childhood. Growing up, play hockey was just something you do as a Canadian, and it was very interesting, right? You don't. Vancouver Island is very obviously isolated. It's out in the Pacific Ocean by itself, so you were kind of shielded from a lot of the things that some of the bigger world things that that are going on currently. And my first foray into the United States was my recruiting trip down to Dartmouth, and it was eye opening. Again, taken from this little microcosm of a town and put onto a much bigger stage and coming to the United States. I think the biggest difference was that up there growing up, you're just a Canadian. right? Like, it doesn't matter your political affiliation, your religious affiliation. It's just, it's Joe from Canada or Karen from Canada. And we didn't use our differences to, we didn't underscore our differences. We actually found interest in them. And I think that was one of the biggest things I saw that really kind of opened my eyes when I came down here.
That's really interesting. So, as a Canadian, you're sort of collectively viewing yourself as a Canadian, but as an American, we sort of identify with who we identify with, but it's not necessarily as a global, I'm an American. It's like it's a different sort of thing. And once you said that, I'm Joe from Canada, I know exactly who Joe from Canada is. I understand it. So, awesome. So being from Canada, you grew up, as you mentioned, around ice hockey. And because of your dad's garage, you grew up around cars. In what ways did that particular environment shape the course of your life, do you think?
Well, I mean, it certainly taught me work ethic. You grew up in a garage, it's a lot different than growing up, under a banker or a lawyer or a doctor. So, if you wanted to get something done, you got your hands dirty. And, so certainly work ethic was a big thing that I learned in the garage. But, it was one of those things, my dad is a, pretty rough and tumble guy, but, he just exuded kindness, right? So you have this guy that, could be intimidating. But, I remember growing up and getting letters sent to the house of, from motorists that were stranded. My dad stopped to help them with their car or change their tires and all that stuff. And the first time I ever heard "walk softly but carry a big stick," I was like, well, that's my dad. And that's kind of what I've walked through life with is, it's one thing to portray a certain image, but, at the end of the day, kindness wins. And, the opportunity in the garage obviously led me to my opportunity in NASCAR, which is nothing I ever thought that I would entertain. But 16 years later, here we are.
Yeah, it's interesting. After you graduated high school, you mentioned earlier that you ultimately wound up coming to the U.S. and it was on a hockey scholarship to Dartmouth. I'd like to talk about what your training looked like back then. In other words, what does that type of training and sacrifice look like to actually get a hockey scholarship to an Ivy League school like Dartmouth?
So, Rob, I feel like looking back, I gamed the system. So basically, 16-year-old kid, really mediocre hockey player, like never was, a star of any of the tournaments, never was on any of the select teams. I was always kind of the last player on the team. But the one thing what I didn't have in talent, I made up in work ethic. And where that served me well was I knew that when the U.S. coaches came to the West Coast to scout the West Coast, they came before their college hockey season started. So if I could have a fast start, I had a shot at being noticed. So the year I was received my scholarship, I was traded to a team. And like I said, I grew up pretty tough boxing, and I was put on this team, and I was put with two of the best players in Canada. And there were these two French players, and they were so outstanding. I basically had to skate with them and make sure no one put their hands on them. But in doing that, these guys were so good. In the first 11 games, I had all sorts of points and all sorts of assists and all sorts of penalty minutes, and I was a really good look for the scouts. So that work ethic allowed me to skate with these two guys. And, like I said, 16 games in, I was really attracted to the scouts, and it just kind of went from there. But it was born of a relentless pursuit of something that I was super passionate about. And I wasn't going to allow anything to get in my way. Not girlfriends at the time, not Friday night movies, nothing, not failure. I think when you're super passionate about something, the bumps along the road show themselves as something different when you're laser focused.
Yes. Like everything else in life, though, we are in things for, a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And you decided to go pro in hockey, and you wound up playing for 7 seasons. But there was a moment where you were shipped to Greensboro, North Carolina. Can you explain, maybe you could talk about the decision that led to you going through that? And in hindsight today, how do you view that situation that happened to you in Greensboro?
Well, I wish I could say that Greensboro was a decision, but unfortunately it was a result. So I was in the American League with the Pittsburgh Penguins top affiliate in Wilkes-Barre. And I had made the opening day roster after finishing the season with them the previous year. And we were 2 days away from the home opener. And after practice, all the guys went for lunch and we were just sitting there. And you know how they run the ticker underneath ESPN? And it, kind of keeps you updated on the transactions. Well, we're all sitting there eating lunch and I'm the only undrafted player in Wilkes-Barre at the time. And I was a defenseman and we're sitting there eating lunch and the ticker says the Pittsburgh Penguins just trade for Doug Wilson and Ethan Moreau from the Florida Panthers, both defensemen. And it went silent at the table because everyone knew that I was on my way out. So I actually went to the rink the next morning, beat coach there, packed my bags. And when he walked in, he's like, yeah, I'm really sorry, kid. And I had made it there just because he loved the way I worked. And it was just one of those things. So I was sent to Greensboro. So I get down there, it's opening night, and a couple things come together. I'm not super happy about the demotion. We're playing a team, and it has a guy that I played college against for 4 years. And in college, there's no fighting. There's none of that. And towards the end of the second period, this guy takes his cheap shot, and our coach is losing his mind, and he's yelling at all of us. And he's like, "Who's going to solve this?" So I said, "I'll solve it." So I jumped over the boards and I line up with this guy. And when the puck drops, we start fighting. Well, a whole big line brawl breaks out. And I have this guy on the ice, and there's gentlemen's rules that govern fighting in hockey. So when I get him to the ice, I stop hitting him. But I look over my shoulder, and they have a heavyweight on their team who actually end up fighting for the Montreal Canadiens, and he's just pounding away at one of our guys. So I leave the guy that I'm with, and I go up and I kind of rescue my buddy. I sucker the guy, which is not one of my prouder moments. And the guy who's originally fighting ends up tackling me to the ground, but he ends up on the bottom. And Rob, when you fire up a lawnmower that's been in the shed all winter, it felt like that. I think I probably hit him 60 times. And he was being escorted off the ice, looked over my shoulder. There was a guy challenging our bench. So I escaped the officials, got all my gear off, and the refs intervened. And I dragged my thumb across my throat and said, because we were playing him the next night. So when I didn't realize I was in trouble until as I was skating off, our team idiot had already been kicked out of the game. And I stepped off the ice and he looked at me and he's like, "Man, you are in huge trouble." And sure enough, I was suspended 6 games for starting it, 6 games for the second altercation, and 6 games for a throat slashing gesture. And it's considered the worst brawl in the history of the East Coast League. And and it's a record suspension. I was suspended for a quarter of the season, which is also a record and not one that my parents are super proud of. But it was one of those things where I was coming to the defense of a teammate and it spiraled out of control. The unintended consequence of that was that I met a person in the stands when I was suspended, and that person had a husband involved with NASCAR. And after a little bit of talking, she was like, "Well, when your dad comes down, we'll take you on a tour of one of the race shops." And sure enough, my dad comes down. We go on a tour of one of these race shops. And it was back before when mechanics were pitting these race cars. And practice wasn't going well. So the crew chief's like, "Yeah, hey, get the hockey player in here." And I was dressed in jeans and, nothing athletic. And I was like, no, I'm good. And he was insistent. So I went. And because I had some athleticism, I was almost as fast as the guy that had been doing it for 5 years. So they were like, "No, you need to do this." And I didn't pay much attention to it. And then sure enough, a year later, I was full-time in NASCAR.
How in the heck did you go from hockey to NASCAR?
Right. So again, we had that tryout story that kind of led to a start. It's funny. I tell people I spent 26 years trying to get to the National Hockey League, and I made it to NASCAR in 6 weeks. So what I did was I outworked everyone again. And it was interesting, Rob, when I got into NASCAR, it was when mechanics pitted the cars. So here we are. I'm in the middle of this multi-million-dollar business, and I'm on the athlete side of it. And I get to my first big race, and all the guys are going out the night before getting absolutely obliterated. And I'm just like, how is this real? How is this, you know what I mean? Because it wasn't hockey. It wasn't football. It wasn't, and there weren't these things in place that led people to better performances. So I took advantage of that, made sure I was, well rested, prepared, stronger, fitter, more dialed in than everybody. And I made for a quick study. And, I literally went for 6 weeks, started with the Keselowski family on the trucks, and then just moved my way up to a cup car and never looked back. And what's funny is, I thought I would do it for a year when I was like, I've always chased fun and laughter. And because going to Dartmouth really kind of let me peek behind the curtain and dispel the myth of what I thought success and wealth was. And for me, I was going after these great experiences in life. And that was 16 years later. And it's funny, you bring the Dartmouth stuff up. One of the more laughable moments I've had is Dartmouth has an alumni magazine. And in it, they have something akin to Sports Illustrated's Faces in the Crowd. So it's 3 pictures before, in every magazine. And this one issue comes to the house. And the first picture is a Dartmouth med student that has won a pretty prestigious prize in medicine. The second picture is a Dartmouth grad who wins Navy Fighter Pilot of the Year. And the third picture is me running around a race car at a race in Kentucky. So it was funny because you have this huge juxtaposition of what people think is success, and here I am. It looks like, oh, Pete settled for NASCAR, but Rob, there's not a day that I look back where I don't think I've had more fun than just about anybody.
Fun is highly underrated for sure. You were what they call, if I got it right, you were a Jackman, where you were carrying a 35-pound jack that lifts a 3,500-pound car in a stroke. And the expectation is that you can do it in 1.2 seconds. That sounds crazy to me. Why did that appeal to you?
It appealed to me because, I'm 6'3", 225, and bigger guys kind of have 2 options. They can carry tires or they can jack the race car. And your Jackman is kind of like your quarterback. He initiates the stop and he ends the stop when he drops it on the left side. And I've always been that adrenaline junkie type person, right? So like if you think about what a Jackman has to do, your picker guy is standing on the wall and he can't go until the car is one pit stall away from your position. So that car is traveling at 55 miles an hour. And so basically when it's 10 feet away, you jump in front of it and you try to race across in front of it before it hits you. And then you turn around and you jack it up. But when you jack it up, there's 40 other race cars that are inches off your heels and your hands going 55 miles an hour. So, people ask us what that's like. It's akin to going out to the interstate, putting your heels up to the white line and letting traffic rip by you. And if that doesn't unnerve you, then you're meant to be a Jackman. And I thought that was thrilling. And it's thrilling until you get your heels run over or you get put on the hood of someone's car. But it was a position I gravitated to early and never looked back.
Do you sort of view yourself as a bit of a adrenaline junkie? I
do. I've always looked for adventure. I've had just a really good gift of always searching, going after life. Not going after living, but going after life, putting myself in spots that scare the hell out of me. And I have a disrespect for failure that allows me to go into those spots without the trepidation that I think a lot of people would, that would hold a lot of people up.
I got it. But then, like everything else, that part of your life transitions. What led to the decision to end your career as a Jackman? And I think it was around 2013, and go into pit crew coaching.
Well, it was a desire to see it done better. So just to give you a little bit of history of the sport, like NASCAR really exploded in the late 90s, early 2000s. And there never was pit crew coaches, right? Because it was just guys would wrench on the cars all day and then go pit the cars. But as the cars became more competitive on the track, there was a decided advantage to be won in the pits. And I was on the front side of athletes coming in. So what had happened is all these guys were coaches that, first of all, had never gone over the wall and done a pit stop. And second of all, had never been coaches. And so you'd be on the wall, Rob, and they'd be like, okay, do this stop and pretend like your daughter's life is on the line. Like they'd say that to you as the car's coming down. And,
oh my God.
And NASCAR pit stops is big stakes, right? Like we have 2 tire changers and it's their job to hit 5 lug nuts in under a second. Okay, so that's 0.2 of a second per lug nut. So if you go ahead and blink your eyes, that's 0.2 of a second. Now, in our world, these cars are traveling 180 feet per second. So 180 feet per second, 0.2 of a second equates to 56 feet. 56 feet is the difference between first and sixth at the Daytona 500. The difference in money is $1.1 million. So $1.1 million is riding on 0.2 of a second. So it's huge stakes. And you have these guys that just weren't putting you in the best position to succeed. So, I had a guy that I've spent my entire NASCAR career with. His name's Mike Metcalf, arguably one of the best human beings on this planet. We thought we could do it a better way. So we decided that we would take on, being a pit crew coach. And that's the direction we took. We took a broken down system. It wasn't devoid of talent, Rob, but it was lazy and it was entitled and it was selfish. And we thought, okay, we can change this. And 3 years later, we won one of the Mechanics Wear Awards for top pit crew. We become the only pit crew that's ever won our sports version of the Walter Payton Award for the way our guys give back and participate in the community. And there's a sense of pride there that that is much more profound than I thought there would have been.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about tackling a new sport. When tackling a new sport like NASCAR, what are some questions or strategies or practices that you borrowed from hockey that helped you with NASCAR?
That's a great question. So like I said, just like I gamed the college hockey thing, when I first got to NASCAR, I really looked for the soft spots. I was like, how do I accelerate my training or my approach to it so that I can get in here quicker? And it goes back to like, one of the big things was preparation. It'd be 4 stops and then the guys would go. A lot of them didn't even work out. So I knew that, if my fitness level was up, not only would it make me, not only would I move better, but I would think better. And, if I was in bed at 9 o'clock, 6 hours or 8 hours before the race, I was putting myself in a better spot than all these guys that were out drinking. I thought that, if I could hydrate my nutrition at the racetrack, if I took care of that, when it came to go and I needed that, I would have that. So there was all these things that went into making you a successful hockey player that easily and instantly transitioned into NASCAR, but that other NASCAR people that I was competing against weren't doing. And it was really interesting because, like I said, my hockey career, I was average, mediocre to bad and struggled and fought the whole time to stay in the lineup. And, because I implemented these systems, I found success early and performed at a high level right from the onset.
Okay. Then you made a decision where, you decided that you were going to train guys, or like we talked about earlier with coaching. And in the process of training guys, you have to teach 5 people how to change 4 tires in 12 seconds, where the difference in the competitive success is literally 1/5 of a second. How do you get them that fast and be able to work together as a cohesive unit?
So you're exactly right. So we are tasked with changing 4 tires in 12 seconds. And we laughingly refer to ourselves as the Department of Unrealistic Expectations because we're expected to do that every single time. And I think everyone has a certain part of unrealistic expectations in their life. And we actually will introduce ourselves like that. But, it starts, Rob, honestly, by inspiring human brilliance, right? Like we operate on the verge of what's humanly possible. And I can't mandate that effort. I can only inspire it. So what we've done over the years is, NASCAR pit stops in the 1960s were in excess of 1 minute and 30 seconds. And it took a great deal of vertical thinking and invention to get them down. The fastest pit stop ever run was 9.97 seconds. If you would have told a guy in 1960 that was going to be possible, he would have laughed at you. But what's gone on is, besides the tooling is, the way pit stops are choreographed and the way guys work together. The athletes we've gone after. I think one thing that would surprise a lot of your audience is if you look up the makeup of our teams over the time at Ganassi, we have a linebacker from the Pittsburgh Steelers. We have a kid that led Clemson in tackles for 2 years. We have an Olympic swimmer. We've had 2 United States Navy SEALs. So the athletic pedigree and acumen of these guys coming in wasn't like myself. Like I said, I was a decent athlete. When I got the kid from Clemson, he ran around the car the first day, and I looked at the other coach and was like, I don't even know if I can coach that. because the movement has become so dynamic. You're getting, instead of, C and D athletes, you're starting to get A's and B's. And that's why you continue to see the times on these pit stops drop. And, it's interesting. Our number one recruiting criteria at Chip Ganassi Racing is we put nothing above being a world-class human being. If you're that, I can turn you into a pit crew guy. If you think about it, the car comes to a stop every time. So it's not like a football field or a hockey rink where you're, reading and reacting to an offense or a defense. It's about perfecting a certain skill. And if you have the work ethic and intestinal fortitude to go after it, we can turn you into that guy.
Got it. Okay. Now, tell me about DEC. What is DEC?
So DEC Leadership is a company I co-founded with Mike Metcalf, and it was born out of an opportunity to speak at the NFL Combine a couple of years ago. And what was interesting was, Indianapolis is a racing town, and they needed a break from all the doctor speak, so they reached out to our race team. And so Mike and I were sent up to Indy, and what was interesting was it was a 3-day conference, and Mike and I get up on stage and we do our talk. And what was surprising was when we were done, there was about 30 doctors and trainers that stuck around to ask us questions, which we were kind of surprised by. Because I think in life, anything you do, you just think that's your work, and that no one would be that interested in what we had to say about NASCAR. And then we're leaving the convention hall, and we get stopped by this guy, and he's like, fellas, I took more notes in your 30 minutes than I have the first 2 days of this conference. And we get into this really great talk about asymmetric movement patterns. And at the end of the talk, I'm like, well, cool, man. Well, who are you with? And he says, well, I'm with the New England Patriots. And right there, Rob, it was like a light bulb going off. First of all, I should have been asking him questions. But secondly, I thought maybe we have something to give to the world. So we started getting, there's a lot of speak in corporate America these days about how, companies want their team to operate like a pit crew. And what they think that is, implementing a process or a system. And it's not. Operating like a pit crew is elevating people over process. Like I said, inspiring human brilliance. And that's what we go to companies and do. Like, we literally will take the race car to the parking lot of your business. We'll put the tires and guns and all the things in your hands, and we'll teach you how to be a team. And what's interesting is so many people, it's funny because the Trojan horse is NASCAR, right? So they just think there's, these rednecks coming to talk to them from NASCAR. But there's so many lessons in NASCAR that parallel what are going on in these companies. So DEC stands for diversity, efficiency, culture, and kindness. And Mike and I, from our glimpse into corporate America, we believe that those are the 4 horsemen of corporate America that we need to do a better job of in order for our teams to operate like pit crews.
Okay, got it. Now, you came up with something called the 12-second culture, and you created a book about it. What is that?
So 12-second culture. So again, it lends itself to what we do. What makes a pit crew great? What allows, speed is the new currency of business, right? We go to certain sandwich shops because we can get a sub sandwich in 2 minutes. We don't go there because it's delicious, right? Even, it was something in the paper not long ago. It said it's no longer big business versus small business. It's fast versus slow. So we teach companies how to operate like pit crews, how to operate efficiently. And the number one thing that moves speed through an organization, Rob, is trust. But so many things that we do nowadays don't build trust. We have a misconception of leadership, that leadership is a company car in a office with a glass window in it. We challenge companies. We were just somewhere recently, and we had this guy, and he was great, but he's really aspiring to get one of those C-level positions. And so I asked him, I said, well, what do you think it's going to take? Where you're at, what do you think it's going to take? And, he told us all these things that were all these superficial things based around money. And I stopped him. I said, well, you want to be a CEO. What does the C in CEO stand for? And he said, it stands for chief. And I said, exactly. And how did a young Indian warrior ascend to the position of chief? And he looked at me and he said, well, I don't really know. And I said, a young Indian warrior starts out by only caring about the group, right? His main focus is to make sure the group is clothed, is fed, and is protected. And all his actions go to the wholeness of the group, to make sure that it's taken care of. And although he doesn't aspire to be chief, because of his selflessness, he ascends to the position of chief. Then I asked him, I said, what's the number one characteristic trait of a psychopath? It's profound lack of empathy. So what sounds more like what's going on in the corporate space right now by the people we lead that are leading us, right? Are you the chief executive officer or are you the psychopath executive officer? If you want a C-level position, act like a chief. Look out for the group. Lead with kindness. Those are the things that we've got to get back to.
Okay, got it. You've also said that America has this sort of preoccupation with being fast and wanting the need to be the best. But that philosophy may be killing us. Can you tell me more about what you mean by that?
Well, just the pace of things. We cannot continue. I think the pace of things hurts us, Rob, honestly. We talk a lot to people about thinking vertically. So many of us come into the office. What's the first thing that we do? We look at the number that sits atop our email icon. And we go down the rabbit hole of answering emails. And before we know it, it's break time. And then we're in a 10 o'clock meeting. And then it's lunchtime. And then we have the insulin crash after lunch. And we're basically useless for an hour. And then before we know it, it's time to go home. So how are we able to elevate to think our business to the next level or think our position to the next level? We weren't, right? So we come back. We're going to do that the next day. And sure enough, we start the day in our emails. And again, it just goes down where before you know it, we're at Friday and all we've done is think horizontally throughout the whole week. Slowing down allows us to think vertically. Think about a fly smashing its head against a glass window, right? And if it were just to back up for one quick second, it would realize the window right next to it is wide open and it could fly right out. And I think that's really important for people to understand. And, Mike and I actually, when we were stuck one time, we decided it was because we did not have time to think. So we started scheduling hours for us to pour back into ourselves. Because if you just deplete yourself in trying to chase something, you're never going to have anything offer as far as ideas or inspiration for your people. So that, like you said, taking your foot off the gas every once in a while benefits people more than you'll ever get by just continuing to just go and burn the candle at both ends.
Yep, makes perfect sense to me. All right, I want to move into sort of let's call it the more personal side of your life and how you think, a little less on the business end of things. Why do you believe that Kipling's poem, If, is as powerful as a 4-year degree? What is it about that?
I just think there's such profound wisdom in it. I think there's a few things in there in that poem that parallel my life that I've really gravitated towards. Like when he talks about losing everything on one roll of the dice and building it back up with worn out tools. I feel like I've had a few of those moments in my life where everything was gone and you don't speak a word of your loss. You just, you put your head down and you grind and you get it back and you recognize the failure and you move through it. As a pit crew coach, Rob, I have a really unique relationship with failure, right? Like I have to fire guys based on tenths of seconds. So, it's one of the things that has served me well in my life. And failure, I truly look at failure as a gift. And I think, again, that going back to the poem, If, there's just so many profound life lessons in every layer of that poem.
Yeah, it's an amazing poem for sure.
Yeah.
What do people often get wrong about you or, your writing or your work or your books or, et cetera?
Right off the hop, the thing that people get wrong about me is that I'm a meathead. I fought in the minors for 8 years. So I have, my hands look like they've been through a shredder. I have, a bunch of scars on my face. Like I'm the last guy that's going to win a handsome contest. But I think people are taken aback sometime when they realize where I went to school or what I studied or, how avid a reader I am. And I'm, it's first impressions sometimes aren't always what they seem to be. And I think that's one thing that people get wrong about me. I think one thing people get wrong about NASCAR is it's just these rednecks in the Southeast. It's not. My doors were blown off the first time I went into a race shop and it had nothing with my dad's occupation. These race shops are spotless. They're almost surgical. And, NASCAR's big business.
Oh, for sure. $1 billion industry. No question about it.
Yep.
What is an unusual or an absurd thing that you love? Weird question, I know.
No. I think one of the things that is absurd is one thing that just mellows me out is searching Circa and Zillow and looking at old houses. I am a history fanatic, and I love old properties. Like, I just love going to visit them, and I'll walk into them, and I'll try to picture what went on there and what went on in the fields. And yeah, it's just a strange thing I have, and it just kind of, that soothes me, and I find there's a piece to it that is inexplainable.
I love that. That's really interesting. What is a new behavior or a belief that has significantly improved the quality of your life? Something that maybe you're looking at sort of differently now than you have been in the past.
Yeah, I think the behavior is bouncing on a trampoline, oddly enough. I think that the thought, I think, that is changing me the most is that, like I said, kindness wins. I think that kindness and grace advances whatever position you take. Kindness and grace allows you to get there and arrive in a better place than any type of forced march, any type of stepping on someone to get there, any type of compromising your morals to get there. And I really try to incorporate that into everything we do. And like I said, I do a lot of this with Mike Metcalf. He's the epitome of grace.
Interesting. What is one goal that you thought, when I achieve it, everything's going to be great? And then you achieve it and you were like, well, that really didn't do what I thought it was going to do.
It was to play in the American Hockey League. And Rob, I swear to you, like I said, I was probably the worst defenseman at Dartmouth, was in and out of the lineup. And I would go to Providence, Rhode Island, every summer, and I would pass by the Providence Civic Center. And that's where the Providence Bruins played. And I would verbalize it every time I passed that arena that I'm going to play there one day. And I had no business. I didn't even think I would make pro. And sure enough, 5 years later, I start out in Texas, go to Greensboro, make my way up to the American Hockey League. And when I made my way up to the American Hockey League, there was only 8 games left in that season. And the second to last game of the season was at Providence. And I'm on the ice, and I get to play in that game. And it was just a surreal moment. But when I got off the ice, I thought of everything that went into that moment. And I wasn't sure. It was wonderful, but there was a lot I sacrificed to get to that moment. And it took me a minute to understand if it was worth everything I'd put into it.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy because so much of these goals are really just about the journey. We don't get that because our eyes are on the goal, right?
Right, exactly. And someone I'm a huge fan of is Carol Dweck. And she talks about becoming is better than being, right? And you look back to the Kobe Bryant speech when here's a guy who all the NBA championships, MVPs, all that stuff. In his final speech, he's talking to his girls about the true success is in the journey, in the being of it, right? And we talk all the time to people about, like, what's your finish line in life, right? And for so many of us, that's a number in our bank account or a vacation home somewhere or a certain type of car that we drive. But the finish line for all of us is 6 feet in the ground. So we had better figure out pretty quickly what that finish line needs to be, because it needs to come before you're 6 feet in the ground. And like I said, one of the best things about Dartmouth was, like I said, getting a peek behind the veil, lifting the whole, money is happiness myth. And that was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Okay, if you could spend 1 month anywhere in the world, where would it be and why?
Yosemite National Park, without hesitation. And
interesting. Why?
I grew up Sunday mornings in a hockey rink, right? So I didn't grow up religiously faithful, but there's something about that park that you just feel insignificant in the universe, and you feel closer to whatever you want to call it, whether it's God or whatever you believe in. There's just a sense that I get there, and it's, you're unplugging from society and you're seeing these spectacular vistas and you're breathing clean air and, sleeping beside streams. And it's just, I used to like the NASCAR season is just so loud and packed with people that I go to Yosemite every year in the middle of the season because we race out in San Francisco just to reset myself. And the one year that I didn't go, by the end of the season, Rob, I was, you could tell, like there was a frenetic energy to me that I just could not dissipate. And one of the only ways I do it is getting in the mountains. And if you have not been to that place is spectacular.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. If you could only go to one restaurant before you die, where would your last meal be and why?
We have there's a little fish and chips place in Seattle. And, Seattle's this huge city, and I think it sits like 4 people. And I get to go home every second year I get to go home and see my parents. And we stop at this little fish and chips place. And, the same families run it, their entire life ever since it's been there. And I don't know, the food and the story of it, like I said, I'm big into stories and history. And I think, it would be the fish and chips place in Seattle. I think it's called Ivar's.
Love it. Okay. Are there any positions or opinions in the last few years, or it could be way back, doesn't have to be in the last few years, that you've changed your mind substantially about? You just went, I used to think this way. I don't think this way anymore.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I have changed on is that one style of coaching or one style of leadership touches everyone the same way. I think the days of Lombardi and some of these heavy-handed guys that just threw a blanket over everyone and held everyone to the exact same standard. Growing up, I read all those books and thought, okay, yeah, that's how I would coach if I ever got to coach. And I think that's wrong. I think, with the way kids are raised these days, all the different pressures in society, I think success in coaching is a direct reflection of your emotional intelligence and your ability to connect with people where they're at. And I think that's probably been by far the biggest change I've made. I used to think I could say one thing, it applies to everybody, but it doesn't touch everyone the same way.
Yeah, it's very difficult to pull certain tools out of a toolbox, because we often want to just use the same brush for everything. But as we get older, we start to realize, this guy needs this, that one needs that, and that comes with experience. So that's really cool. There's 2 other questions I wanted to ask you before we wrap. The first one is, with every new level that you get to in life comes a new devil. What are you personally currently struggling with? And it could be professionally or personally.
One of my favorite things in my life is sitting on the porch with my wife of our barn and having coffee. And I find that the more you're pulled with time, the more I have to be very intentional about protecting that space. And I find that, again, we talk about silence and slowing down, not even just spending time with her, but that silence and that quietness is so important to me that, I think that's one of the biggest challenges is, like I said, being very intentional about my time and how it's used and what you say yes to and what I say no to.
That is the biggest struggle in the world, because every time you say yes to something, you got to say no to something else.
Correct.
So I love that. Okay, so we're going to do our rapid fire round now. Answer as quickly or as slowly as you would like. It's basically a first thing that comes to mind round. What would your friends say is one of your superpowers?
I would say my emotional intelligence, my ability to manage my emotions in really crazy situations, like stuff that presents itself at the track and that is totally unscripted. And you have crew chiefs yelling at you and you have 400 horsepower motors going. So you're screaming at each other and you got to determine whether it's out of anger or it's just out of trying the ability to communicate. I would certainly say managing my emotions.
Love that. Okay. What do people never ask you, but you wish they did?
I wish they would ask me more about my guys. Rob, I honestly feel like I work with 26 of the best human beings on this planet. Like I said, they are the only picker that's ever won our version sport of the Walter Payton Award. And, it is, a lot of bosses say it's a privilege to get to go to work with my employees, but I truly feel that way. And these guys, again, we go back to kindness, right? And a lot of people think kindness and empathy is weakness, and it's not. Like I said, I have guys that, fighters and linebackers and guys that would hurt people that are the epitome of kindness. And I wish, like I said, I wish more people would ask me what these guys are like beyond just being pit crew guys.
I love that. Okay. What is the one thing that you personally want to get better at?
Meditation. That's probably a default answer to a lot of your people, but
No, actually, I rarely hear it because most of the people that I interview are super, super, regular meditators. So it's unusual to hear people that are, either just starting out or need to get better at it. So tell me more.
My meditation, my intent to meditate has been in my New Year's resolutions for the past decade, and I get up there and I love it because, like I said, I understand the importance of slowing down. But I meditate in our gym, and this is the meathead part of me. So I'll start meditating, and then I'll be like, well, I'll just grab a quick set of bench, or I'll just do some curls, or I'll just it's my inner meathead coming out, and what I need to do is probably separate myself from that space, but it's always been the space where I've tried to meditate. And, I get on runs where I'll go for a month or two. But I really started getting better at it when I understood how it changed your brain structure. And I think that's what kind of led me more to it, but I can be lured out of it pretty easily.
Yeah, for sure. It is. They call it a practice because you are practicing. There's no question about it.
Right.
What book have you reread the most?
Well, we talked about Carol Dweck. That's something I think is pretty dog-eared now. I think Sacred Hoops. I've taken that with me most of my life, and it really helped me manage my emotions early on in my hockey career and into NASCAR. And I think there's a ton of valuable lessons in that book.
All right. And then the last question that I want to ask you, I told you there was only two, but obviously there were more. Let's change it up a little bit. What one question would you like to ask me?
Well, actually, I have two, if you don't mind.
Nope.
I was first introduced to you on a car ride to Charleston. My wife is probably Lori Harder's second listener, if not the first. And I remember I was going to Charleston listening to you, and you're a successful guy. And I would like to know what your definition of success is and what thing you think is the most successful thing that you've done in your life.
Well, that's a double whammy. For me, success is being able to do what I want, when I want, with whomever I want, as often as I want. That is true freedom and true success for me. And that doesn't mean in a big flashy kind of way. It just means that I want to have options.
Yeah.
So I love that as success for me. And then the other part of the question, what has been, restate that one again?
If you had to put your finger on the thing that you are most proud of, the thing that you're the most successful at, what is that thing?
I would say, I don't know if this is the answer that you're looking for, but it would be curiosity. I have an inborn, insatiable, never-ending, relentless, from the moment I wake up till the moment I go to sleep, curiosity. I'm fascinated by everything. I don't care if it's NASCAR or the leaves in my backyard or the birds, or I can't stop learning and questioning. It is an obsession of mine that I have to be honest with you, I have to hold back, because when I have dinner, it could be quite annoying to have dinner with me, because I will just drill you until you're like, oh my God, can I just have a margarita and have some Mexican food? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that driver in me has connected me in a much deeper, more meaningful way with people, because I genuinely am interested in them and their life. And it's not a made up thing. It's not like I'm asking you questions about your life because I'm trying to trick you into being connected with me by having you think that I care about you. I genuinely want to know about everything in your life.
Yeah.
And I think that has served me through any business project or personal thing that I've done, or as a dad, but I think it's crossed all platforms.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Rob, honestly, the reason I remember you on that Lori Harder podcast was because you had gone into your background and you talked about, some of your early family stuff. And my dad was a cycle breaker, and he came from 3 generations of, his dad, his great grandfather, his grandfather. They were all drunk and just either left or just did things that were, terrible as my dad grew up. And my dad was the first one to break that cycle. And it's something I don't think he thinks of, but like if I look at all the accomplishments in his life, like that should be number one. And I remember that because I think you had a similar situation. And and I think that should be on your success radar, because what that did for your children, and I know what it did, my dad did for me. If I would have grown up, I can't imagine putting myself where I got to without my dad taking me to the rink at 5 a.m. and without, and for those cycle breakers out there, man, it's tough to imagine something that you did for your children that is more successful than that. So I wanted to applaud you on that. And like I said, that's why I remembered you. And when your name, first came up to me, I'm like, I know that name. And that's exactly where I remembered it from.
That's awesome, man. We are all on the path, and there's no chance meeting. It's by no accident that your name has come up to me from our mutual friend, Mrs. Purdy, to our now mutual friend, Kyle Depp, I think is how you say his last name, and a couple of other people too that I'm blanking on right now. So when 3, 4, 5 people start saying, "Hey, you got to have this guy on the show," I know that there was a reason, and we were meant to connect. So this is awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Do you have any final words, suggestions, or an ask for the people that are listening?
No, the only thing I ask is be a light. There's so much hate and so much things that are going on there that tear us apart. Let's find the things that are different about each other, and instead of underscoring them and letting them divide us, let's be curious about them and bring us together. We're, as human beings, we're tribal. We're meant to be together. We're meant to be necessary. Again, we always talk about kindness wins. If we want to make this place better, we have to find a way to come together. So I implore people to, like you said, like you, Rob, be curious. Try to find, let's look at the different and see where we can bring this thing together. But be a light is all I could say.
Man, there's no other truer words than at the recording of this podcast that the world needs than that statement. So that is a mic drop right there, and we're going to end it on that note. Shaun, thanks for taking the time, and we will link up all of your information in the show notes.
Awesome, man. If you ever, NASCAR might not be on your radar. If you or your buddies ever want to come to a race, Rob, please get in touch with me, and I would love to entertain you one weekend if you ever desire.
I'd love it, man. Thanks again.
All right, buddy. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks for listening. If you love this episode and you know someone that needs some help in either stepping up their work hard game or their play hard game, it would mean the world to me if you shared this podcast with them to help me get this movement out there. So if you like what you heard, head on over to iTunes, take 30 seconds and leave me a 5-star review, and I will be forever grateful. So until the next episode, excuses are over. It's time to live.